The dog should have been dead before sunrise. The river lay silent beneath a skin of ice, winding through the northern Montana wilderness like a frozen ribbon of steel beneath the moonlight. Snow drifted across the banks in slow, ghostly swirls, carried by a wind that seemed to whisper through the pine trees rather than blow. The temperature had fallen below 10 degrees Fahrenheit hours ago, cold enough to turn breath into crystal and silence into something almost alive. Caleb Walker pulled the collar of his weathered canvas coat higher as he moved along the river trail. At 52, the retired Navy SEAL had long ago traded missions and deployments for solitude. His cabin sat 3 miles deeper in the forest, hidden among towering pines where no one came unless they were lost. Most days, he preferred it that way. The woods demanded nothing from him. The snow never asked questions. The river never reminded him of things he wished he could forget. His boots crunched against the packed snow as he followed the familiar route home after checking a line of winter game cameras. Above him, clouds drifted across the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called once, then fell silent. Caleb stopped. Something had moved near the edge of the frozen river. At first he thought it was a fallen branch half buried beneath fresh snow. Then the shape shifted. Barely. Just enough. Every instinct sharpened at once. He stepped carefully toward the riverbank. The wind carried a faint scent he couldn't place. Not danger. Not decay. Something weaker. Fragile. 20 feet ahead, partially covered by drifting snow, lay a German shepherd. The animal's dark sable coat blended almost perfectly into the shadows. One foreleg twitched weakly against the ice. Frost clung to its whiskers. Its chest rose so faintly that Caleb almost missed it. The dog was alive. Barely. He knelt immediately. The shepherd's amber eyes flickered open for a second before drifting closed again. White foam stained the fur around its mouth. Its breathing came in shallow, uneven bursts. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen enough injured animals in his life to recognize the signs. This wasn't exposure alone. Something else was wrong. Something had poisoned the animal. "Easy, buddy," he said quietly. His voice disappeared into the cold air. The dog didn't react. Caleb removed one glove and checked for a pulse beneath the thick fur near the chest. Weak. Alarmingly weak. The shepherd should not have survived this long in temperatures like these. Yet somehow it had. Then he noticed something strange. A length of faded red fabric protruded from beneath the dog's front paws. The shepherd's claws were wrapped around it, as if it had spent every remaining ounce of strength trying to hold on. Caleb carefully brushed away some snow. It wasn't just fabric. It looked like part of a child's winter scarf. The dog stirred suddenly. Its eyes opened again. This time they locked directly onto Caleb. Not with fear. Not with aggression. With urgency. The shepherd tried to move. Tried to pull itself forward across the ice. Toward the river. Toward something hidden beyond the drifting snow. Then its strength gave out. Its head collapsed back against the frozen ground. Caleb followed the direction of its gaze into the darkness. The river stretched away beneath moonlight and shadow. Empty. Silent. Yet something deep in his gut told him the dog hadn't been trying to save itself. It had been trying to save someone else. Caleb did not look back at the river until the cabin lights appeared through the trees. The German shepherd lay wrapped inside 2 wool blankets across the rear seat of his aging pickup, barely moving except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Every few minutes Caleb glanced into the mirror. Every few minutes he expected the breathing to stop. Somehow it never did. Snow tapped softly against the windshield as the truck crawled along the narrow forest road. The heater rattled with age, pushing out uneven bursts of warmth that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Outside, the wilderness stretched silent beneath the moonlit sky. Inside, another silence settled between the man and the dog. It was the kind Caleb knew well. The silence that followed things people never spoke about. The cabin stood alone on a small ridge overlooking the valley. Built from rough pine logs more than 30 years earlier, it had survived storms, harsh winters, and long stretches without visitors. A single lantern glowed beside the front porch. Caleb carried the shepherd inside, without hesitation. The dog weighed less than it should have. Far less. Bones pressed beneath thick fur. Weeks of hardship showed in every fragile movement. He placed the animal beside the stone fireplace and immediately added another log to the flames. Orange light spilled across the room. Shadows danced along old photographs hanging on the walls. Most of them faced outward toward distant oceans, training ranges, and younger versions of men who had once believed they could fix every problem they encountered. Caleb rarely looked at them anymore. The dog stirred weakly as warmth slowly filled the room. Its ears twitched. One eye opened halfway before closing again. Caleb knelt nearby and examined the faded red scarf more carefully. The fabric was worn and stained by weather. A small section of embroidery remained visible near one edge. He brushed away frost with his thumb. A single stitched letter appeared. M, nothing more. No name. No clue. Just one lonely letter sewn into red thread. He set the scarf on the table and moved toward the kitchen. A kettle soon began to hum softly atop the stove. The familiar sound filled the cabin. For years, routines like these had been enough to occupy empty evenings. Coffee, firewood, silence, sleep, then repeat. He had convinced himself that solitude was peace. Yet sometimes, during long winter nights when wind rattled the windows, another memory always returned. 7 years earlier, a mission in rough weather. A teammate named Ryan Mercer. A decision made in seconds. An outcome Caleb replayed thousands of times afterward. The official reports called it unavoidable. Caleb never believed them. The kettle whistled sharply. He blinked and returned to the present. The dog was watching him now. Barely conscious, barely able to lift its head, but watching. Amber eyes reflected the firelight. Tired eyes. Determined eyes. Not the eyes of an animal ready to surrender. Caleb crouched beside it again. You are fighting awfully hard for somebody, he said quietly. The shepherd's gaze shifted toward the window, toward the darkness beyond the glass, toward the frozen river somewhere beyond the trees. Then a faint sound escaped its throat. Not a growl, not pain, a plea. Caleb followed its stare into the night. The forest remained still. Yet for the second time that evening, he felt the same unsettling certainty settle deep inside him. Whatever waited beyond that river was still out there, and the dog knew it. The wind arrived sometime after midnight. It swept through the pines with a low, mournful sound that echoed across the valley and brushed against the cabin walls like distant surf. Caleb sat awake beside the fireplace, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Sleep had never come easily. Not after years of training himself to wake at the slightest sound. Not after years of memories that preferred darkness to daylight. Across the room, the German shepherd remained curled beneath the blankets. For hours there had been little change. The animal drifted between exhaustion and uneasy rest, its breathing shallow but steady. Caleb had spoken with the nearest veterinarian by satellite phone earlier that evening. The storm had made travel impossible until morning. For now, warmth, water, and time were the only treatments available. Time. The one thing nobody could guarantee. The fire cracked softly. Outside, snow tapped against the windows. Caleb stared into the flames. Then a sound pulled his attention away. The shepherd was moving. Slowly at first. One paw shifted beneath the blanket. Then another. Caleb set down the coffee and crossed the room. The dog lifted its head several inches before wobbling from the effort. Amber eyes opened wider than before. Alert now. Searching. The same urgency remained. Easy, Caleb said. You are not going anywhere tonight. The dog ignored him. It struggled upright. Its legs trembled beneath its own weight. Every muscle seemed uncertain after whatever ordeal had brought it to the riverbank. Yet determination drove it forward. One step, then another. Caleb moved close enough to catch it if it collapsed. Instead of heading toward the food bowl or water dish, the shepherd turned directly toward the front door. It stopped there and stared. Waiting. Caleb frowned. You cannot be serious. The dog glanced back at him, then returned its gaze to the door. The message seemed unmistakably clear. Something outside mattered more than its own recovery. Caleb opened the door a few inches. A rush of icy air flooded inside. Snowflakes drifted through the gap. The shepherd immediately raised its nose toward the darkness. Its ears twitched. Listening. Scenting. Remembering. Then a faint whine escaped its throat. Not fear. Concern. Caleb looked out across the forest. Moonlight reflected from fresh snow, turning the landscape silver and blue. Nothing moved. No lights. No vehicles. No signs of another person anywhere within miles. Yet the dog continued staring toward the distant river valley, as though it knew exactly where it needed to go. Eventually, Caleb guided the exhausted animal back toward the fireplace. This time it obeyed. Reluctantly, the moment it settled onto the blanket, its eyes closed again. Within minutes, sleep claimed it completely. Caleb remained awake long after. Just before dawn, he noticed something tucked beneath the dog's collar. A small metal tag hidden beneath thick fur. Weathered. Scratched. Easy to miss. He carefully turned it over. The front carried no name. No address. Only a single engraving. Ranger Search and Rescue Foundation. Caleb sat motionless. Search and rescue. The words lingered in the quiet room. Suddenly the red scarf. The desperate behavior. The fixed stare toward the river. None of it felt random anymore. Outside, the first pale light of morning appeared beyond the mountains. The storm had finally passed. Caleb looked toward the sleeping shepherd, then toward the frozen wilderness beyond the window. If this dog belonged to a search and rescue team, there was only one question that mattered. Who was it still trying to find? Morning arrived pale and cold across the valley. Fresh snow covered the forest in a blanket of untouched white, smoothing every ridge and hollow beneath a sky the color of brushed steel. Caleb stood on the porch fastening the buttons of his winter coat while the scent of pine and wood smoke drifted through the crisp air. Beside him, the German shepherd waited. The dog was still weak. That much was obvious. Its movements lacked strength, and its ribs remained visible beneath the sable coat. Yet something inside it had changed overnight. The exhaustion had not disappeared, but purpose now burned behind those amber eyes. Caleb glanced down at the weathered rescue tag resting in his palm one final time before slipping it into his pocket. Whoever this dog belonged to had trained it well. Search and rescue dogs did not wander aimlessly through frozen wilderness carrying scraps of a child's scarf. They followed missions. They followed people. More importantly, they did not quit. The shepherd stepped off the porch and immediately turned toward the eastern ridge overlooking the river valley. It did not hesitate. It did not search for direction. It simply knew where it wanted to go. Caleb followed. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws as they moved through the silent forest. Sunlight filtered between towering pines, casting long blue shadows across the drifts. Somewhere high above, a hawk circled against the morning sky. Otherwise, the wilderness remained still. Nearly an hour passed before the dog slowed. Its nose worked constantly, testing the cold air. Every few yards it paused, adjusted course slightly, then continued. Caleb watched carefully. Years of training had taught him to recognize focus when he saw it. The animal was tracking something. Then suddenly the shepherd stopped. Its ears rose. Its entire body stiffened. Caleb moved beside it. Ahead, partially hidden beneath fresh snow, lay a line of footprints. Human footprints. Faint, nearly erased by the storm, yet unmistakable. Caleb crouched for a closer look. The tracks appeared small. Possibly a teenager. Possibly a woman. Hard to tell. The snowfall had distorted their shape. What mattered was their direction. They led deeper toward the river basin. The same direction the dog had been trying to reach since the previous night. "You found something," Caleb whispered. The shepherd looked at him briefly before continuing forward. The trail wound through a narrow stand of spruce trees before descending toward a frozen meadow. There, another clue appeared. Half buried beneath powder sat a bright blue mitten. Child-sized. Caleb carefully lifted it from the snow. The inside label remained intact. Emma. The name was written in faded black marker. A cold feeling settled inside his chest. First the scarf. Now the mitten. Two items belonging to a child. The shepherd approached and sniffed the mitten before releasing a soft whine. Not panic. Recognition. Caleb stared across the frozen meadow. Beyond it rose a low hill scattered with boulders and fallen timber. At the base of that hill something metallic reflected sunlight. A faint glimmer barely visible through the snow. Caleb narrowed his eyes. It looked like part of a vehicle. The dog had already started moving toward it. Faster now despite its weakened condition. Caleb followed immediately. Because whatever waited beyond that hill was no longer a mystery. It was the reason this faithful dog had refused to die. The metallic glimmer grew larger with every step. Snow squeaked beneath Caleb's boots as he crossed the frozen meadow behind the German shepherd. The dog moved with surprising determination despite its condition, weaving between drifts and patches of exposed grass that poked through the white landscape. The hill rose gently ahead, shielding whatever lay beyond from view. A cold breeze drifted down from the higher ridges carrying the scent of pine, ice, and distant water moving beneath the frozen river. When they finally reached the base of the slope, Caleb stopped. Half buried beneath snow and tangled branches sat a dark green pickup truck. Only part of the roof and windshield remained visible. The rest had disappeared beneath drifts piled high by the storm. The vehicle looked as though it had been sleeping beneath winter for days. The shepherd immediately approached the driver's side and began sniffing around the door. Caleb moved carefully closer. The windows were frosted, but after brushing away ice with his glove, he managed to see inside. Empty. No driver. No passengers. Just a few scattered belongings resting on the seats. A thermos. A folded blanket. A backpack. He tried the door handle. Locked. Circling the vehicle, he noticed something else. A bright orange search and rescue vest lay partially trapped beneath snow near the rear tire. The shepherd stopped beside it and lowered its nose. Caleb picked it up. Sewn across the back were the words Gallatin County Volunteer Search Team. His pulse quickened. The dog had not belonged to a missing family. The dog belonged to the people searching for them. Suddenly the pieces began shifting into place. Search dogs. Rescue teams. A child named Emma. A storm. A stranded vehicle. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where was everyone now? The shepherd lifted its head sharply. Its ears stood tall. Then it started forward again. Past the truck. Past the hill. Toward a narrow ravine hidden beyond a stand of spruce trees. Caleb followed without hesitation. The terrain became steeper. Snow gathered deeper between rocks and fallen timber. Several times he nearly lost sight of the dog as it moved ahead through the winding passage. Then the ravine opened into a small sheltered basin protected from the wind. The shepherd stopped near a cluster of large boulders. For several seconds nothing happened. Caleb scanned the area. Snow. Rocks. Shadows. Silence. Then he noticed a splash of color near one of the stone outcroppings. Bright yellow. Fabric. He moved closer. A camping tarp had been stretched between rocks to create a makeshift shelter. Most of it remained hidden beneath snow. The structure appeared old enough to have weathered several days of storms. Caleb knelt beside it. Inside he found an empty sleeping bag, a flashlight with depleted batteries, several food wrappers, and a handwritten note tucked beneath a metal cup to keep it from blowing away. The paper trembled slightly in his gloved hand as he unfolded it. The message was brief. We are moving downstream toward the old ranger station. Emma is getting weaker. Ranger keeps trying to guide us back, but the storm is too strong. If someone finds this, please help. Caleb read the words twice. Then he looked at the German shepherd. The dog stood motionless beside the shelter, amber eyes fixed toward the distant river valley once again. Not searching, not guessing, waiting, as if it already knew exactly where Emma was. The note remained folded in Caleb's pocket as they descended toward the river. Every few minutes he touched it, as if confirming the words were still real. Emma is getting weaker. The sentence echoed louder than the wind. The German shepherd moved ahead with renewed urgency, weaving through snow-covered willows and clusters of frost-coated brush that lined the riverbank. The afternoon sun hung low above the mountains, casting long shadows across the frozen landscape. Beneath the thick ice, dark water still flowed somewhere below, hidden but alive. Caleb followed the dog for nearly a mile. The terrain grew rougher as the river narrowed between rocky embankments. Fresh snow concealed cracks and uneven ground. More than once he slipped and caught himself against a tree trunk. Each time the shepherd stopped and looked back, refusing to continue until Caleb was moving again. It was not the behavior of a lost animal. It was the behavior of a partner. Then the dog froze. Its ears snapped forward. Its entire body became rigid. Caleb immediately recognized the change. Something had triggered certainty. The shepherd trotted toward a bend in the river where a cluster of fallen cottonwoods stretched across the ice like giant skeletal fingers. There it began pawing frantically at the snow. Caleb hurried forward. At first he saw nothing unusual. Only ice. Snow. Wind-blown drifts. Then he heard it. A faint sound. So faint he thought he imagined it. A tiny cry carried across the frozen air. Caleb's heart stopped. He dropped to one knee and listened again. There. A weak voice. Human. Small. The sound seemed to come from beneath the snow-covered ice shelf extending from the riverbank. The shepherd barked once. The first bark Caleb had heard from the dog since finding him. Not loud. Not panicked. Certain. Caleb immediately grabbed the compact avalanche shovel attached to his pack. Snow flew aside with every stroke. The dog dug beside him despite its weakened condition. Minutes felt like hours. Then a narrow opening appeared beneath the overhanging ice. A pocket hidden from the wind. Caleb lowered himself carefully and shined a flashlight into the darkness. A pair of frightened blue eyes stared back. A little girl wrapped in blankets sat curled inside the sheltered cavity. She could not have been older than 9. Her cheeks were pale from the cold, but she was awake, alive. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then tears filled her eyes. "Ranger," she whispered. The shepherd immediately crawled toward the opening. His tail moved weakly against the snow. The little girl reached out trembling hands and buried her face against his neck. Relief transformed her expression. Not excitement. Not surprise. Relief. The kind that arrives when hope finally returns. Caleb felt something tighten inside his chest. "Emma," he asked softly. She nodded. "Mom and Dad went to find help yesterday. Ranger stayed with me." Her voice shook from exhaustion. "He left this morning. I thought maybe he got lost." Caleb looked down at the dog. The shepherd leaned gently against the child, eyes half closed. Poisoned. Injured. Nearly frozen. Yet somehow he had crossed miles of wilderness to bring back the one thing she needed most. Someone who could help. Caleb stared at the fading winter sunlight beyond the river bend and realized this rescue was only beginning. Because Emma was safe. But her parents were still somewhere out there. The journey back to the cabin felt longer than the miles suggested. Dusk settled over the valley, painting the snow in shades of blue and silver while the last traces of sunlight disappeared behind distant peaks. Caleb carried Emma wrapped securely inside his heavy winter coat whenever the terrain became difficult. When she walked, she stayed close beside him, one small hand resting against the German shepherd's shoulder as if afraid he might disappear again. Ranger never wandered far from her. Even exhausted, he matched her pace step for step. By the time the cabin lights appeared through the trees, the first stars had begun to emerge overhead. Warmth greeted them immediately. The crackling fireplace filled the room with golden light, and the scent of burning cedar replaced the sharp bite of winter air. Emma sat quietly beneath a thick blanket while Caleb prepared soup and hot tea. Ranger stretched out near the hearth. For the first time since Caleb had found him beside the frozen river, the dog seemed willing to rest. His eyes remained on Emma, however, following her every movement. "He always does that," she said softly. Caleb looked up from the stove. "Does what?" Emma smiled faintly. "Make sure everybody is okay before he sleeps." The answer lingered in the room. Caleb handed her a steaming mug. Outside, darkness settled fully across the mountains. Inside, a satellite phone rested on the wooden table between them. Earlier, Caleb had finally managed to contact county emergency services. A rescue team was already mobilizing. Roads remained difficult after the storm, but help was on the way. Even so, one problem remained unresolved. Emma's parents. Nobody knew where they were. Caleb unfolded the note again beneath the lantern light. He studied every word carefully, moving downstream toward the old ranger station. The message had been written quickly, but not carelessly. Whoever wrote it had expected someone might eventually find it. "Tell me exactly what happened," Caleb said gently. Emma stared into the fire for several moments before speaking. "Our truck got stuck during the storm. Mom and Dad called for help, but the signal stopped working. Ranger kept trying to lead us somewhere. Dad said he probably smelled a road or a building." She paused. "Then Ranger got sick." Caleb listened carefully. "Sick how?" "He would not eat. He got really weak." Her eyes drifted toward the sleeping dog. Dad thought maybe he found something bad in the snow. Caleb felt a quiet unease settle inside him. The same thought had crossed his mind more than once. Yet something about it felt incomplete. Search dogs were highly trained. Accidental mistakes were possible, but uncommon. Before he could ask another question, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The dog's ears stood alert. His gaze locked onto the front window. Every muscle tensed. Caleb immediately noticed. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Ranger rose to his feet. Not frantically, not fearfully, purposefully. He walked toward the door and stopped. Then he looked back at Caleb. Once. The same look he had given beside the river. The same look he had given before every discovery. Caleb exchanged a glance with Emma. Outside, the forest appeared still beneath moonlight and fresh snow. Yet Ranger was certain. Someone was out there. And this time, Caleb trusted him completely. Caleb opened the cabin door and stepped into the cold night. Moonlight washed across the clearing, turning the snow into a field of silver. Ranger moved ahead immediately, stopping at the edge of the porch with his nose lifted into the wind. The dog stood perfectly still, listening, searching, waiting. Caleb joined him. At first he heard nothing except the distant rustle of pine branches. Then a faint sound drifted through the darkness. An engine. Far away. Weak. Intermittent. Ranger took off toward the tree line. Caleb grabbed his flashlight and followed. Behind them, Emma watched from the cabin window, her small silhouette framed by warm firelight. The forest swallowed them within seconds. Snow reflected the moonlight beneath the trees, creating pale pathways through the darkness. Ranger moved quickly despite everything he had endured. Caleb struggled to understand how the dog still had strength left. Yet every step seemed driven by something greater than exhaustion. The engine sound returned. Louder this time. Then silence. Then another brief sputter. Caleb increased his pace. They crossed a frozen creek bed and climbed a low ridge overlooking a narrow service road rarely used during winter. There, nearly half a mile away, a pair of dim headlights blinked through the trees before vanishing again. Ranger barked once and raced downhill. Caleb followed. As they approached, the scene slowly came into focus. A utility vehicle sat, tilted near a snowbank. Emergency flashers glowed weakly against the darkness. Beside it stood two figures bundled in winter gear, waving desperately toward the forest. The moment Ranger saw them, he accelerated. His tail rose. His ears stood tall. One of the figures dropped to their knees. "Ranger," a woman cried. Her voice cracked with disbelief. The shepherd reached her seconds later. She wrapped both arms around his neck while tears streamed freely down her face. Beside her, a man removed his winter cap and simply stared. Relief softened every line of exhaustion across his face. Caleb slowed as he approached. Nobody spoke for several moments. The family reunion needed no explanation. Ranger leaned against them both, eyes half closed, tail brushing the snow. Finally, the man stepped forward. "My name is Daniel Harper," he said quietly. "This is my wife, Laura. We have been looking for him for 3 days." Caleb nodded. "Emma is safe." Neither parent moved. For one heartbeat, they simply stared. Then Laura covered her mouth. Daniel closed his eyes and exhaled a breath that seemed years old. "She is alive?" Caleb smiled. "She is waiting at my cabin." The silence that followed carried more gratitude than words could express. During the drive back toward the cabin, pieces of the story finally emerged. Ranger belonged to the county search and rescue team. During the storm, he had located the stranded family before official crews could reach them. While guiding rescuers through worsening conditions, he had become ill after consuming contaminated food left behind near an abandoned campsite. Even weakened, he had refused to abandon the Harpers. When the storm separated everyone, Ranger continued trying to lead help back to Emma. Caleb listened quietly. The road curved through moonlit pines. Ahead, the warm glow of the cabin appeared once more between the trees. Beside him, Ranger rested peacefully for the first time since they had met. His mission was almost complete, and for the first time in many years, Caleb felt something awakening inside himself as well. Hope. Winter loosened its grip slowly over the weeks that followed. Snow retreated from the valley one patch at a time, revealing dark earth, pale grass, and the winding river that had hidden so many secrets beneath its frozen surface. The rescue became local news for a short while. Volunteers returned to retrieve equipment. Search teams completed reports. County officials thanked everyone involved. Then, as often happens, life moved forward. But some stories leave marks that remain long after the headlines disappear. Ranger recovered steadily. The veterinarian confirmed what Caleb had already suspected. The dog had endured far more than anyone realized. Yet each morning he greeted the day with the same calm determination that had carried him through the storm. His strength returned little by little. First came longer walks, then short runs through the trees behind the cabin. Before long he was bounding across open meadows again, his sable coat glowing beneath the spring sunlight. Caleb often watched from the porch with a coffee mug in hand. The sight never failed to make him smile. Months earlier, he would have denied that such simple moments mattered. Now he knew better. Emma and her parents visited often. Their truck became a familiar sight, climbing the gravel road toward the cabin. Emma always arrived carrying something. homemade cookies, drawings, wildflowers gathered from mountain fields. Ranger greeted her every time with the same quiet joy. She would wrap her arms around his neck and whisper stories into his ears while he listened patiently, as though every word deserved attention. One afternoon, she presented Caleb with a framed photograph. It showed the three of them standing beside the river during a warm spring morning. Ranger sat proudly between them. Across the bottom, Emma had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. Heroes do not always wear uniforms. Caleb stared at the picture for a long moment. Then he carefully placed it above the fireplace where everyone could see it. The old weight he had carried for years had not vanished overnight. Some losses never disappear completely. Some memories remain part of who we become. But something had changed. The guilt that once filled every quiet corner of his life no longer held the same power. Helping Emma, trusting Ranger, choosing to act when it mattered. Those things had reminded him of a truth he had forgotten. Redemption rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it arrives one choice at a time. One act of kindness. One second chance. Late one evening, nearly 6 months after the rescue, Caleb and Ranger stood together beside the river. The water flowed freely now beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Birds drifted overhead. Pine trees swayed gently in the warm breeze. Caleb looked down at the dog. Ranger looked back. No commands were needed. No words. Just understanding. The kind built through shared trials and quiet loyalty. Caleb rested a hand against the shepherd's shoulder. The river moved steadily onward, carrying winter far behind them. Somewhere nearby, laughter echoed from Emma and her family preparing a picnic along the bank. Ranger's ears lifted at the sound. His tail moved once. Caleb smiled. For years he had believed the best chapters of his life were already finished. Standing there beside the dog who refused to give up, he finally understood something different. Sometimes grace finds us when we stop searching for it. Sometimes it arrives on 4 paws, carrying hope through the snow.